Okay, so to get started with today we will be celebrating Juneteenth. I have been, over the last few months, since Black History Month, continuing a project where I've been sharing stories and quotes from Americans born into slavery, mostly from the American Slave Narrative Project from the early 1900s. Over the next few weeks, I will be sharing a few special installments of that. Today, I am looking to share a little installment called Stories and the Power of Stories, and I was asked to open the rally with this, which I am absolutely honored to do. So thank you very much. So, settle in a bit. This is going to be a good amount of information. I want to start by introducing Documenting the American South. Documenting the American South is a digital publishing initiative that provides internet access to texts, images, and audio files related to Southern history, literature, and culture. Recollections was probably transcribed and introduced by Reverend Joshua Leavitt, the editor of The Emancipator, a newspaper of the American Anti-Slavery Society. The narrative was published serially in 5 installments of The Emancipator from August 23rd to October 18th, 1838. Leavitt makes no apology for the plain style of writing and notes that there was no poetry in the bruises of the man who fell among thieves between Jerusalem and Jericho. It was no pathetic tale of distress that lured the Good Samaritan from across the way, but the simple sight of a bleeding brother. What I am about to read is these recollections that were published in this paper over that period of time. They are the recollections of an unnamed slave who we do not know. We only believe we know who transcribed them. I'm going to read a few select passages and intersperse some other things throughout them from Recollections of Slavery by a Runaway Slave. From the words of an unnamed slave born in Raleigh, South Carolina. Mistress had a little daughter named Jane, and she used to send her out to the old cotton house to watch us and see if we were working smart. She crept along and peeped through the chinks in the fence, and if she saw us laughing and talking, or a little merry, though we were about our tasks, she would say, "Ah, I see you idle. I shall go and tell Ma." And then we would beg and say, "Please don't tell this time, Missy Jane." But she always did. It pleased her mightily to have us whipped. An old woman cooked for us when we were so small. We had 2 meals a day, one at morning and one at noon. They never gave us anything at night. Sometimes mothers would stint themselves and save a piece of ash cake to give to their children at night. This is all they could do for them. The infants of the slaves are always neglected. Their mothers take them into the field in the morning, slung on their backs, and carry a cradle on their head made from a hollow tree. They put them in this and set them in the shade. And if they hear them cry ever so much, they cannot go see what's the matter. Right now, I would like to take a break to really focus on a few ways that these stories can be so important. And to do that, I want to share a quote from Jerry Davis, an ex-slave from an interview in North Carolina by the Narrative Slave Project. He starts with this. "Yes, I'll tell you the only real tale that I know about them story about Jack. Jack and the devil is the story he shared. Once, Jack got the devil into a dispute about who can throw a rock the furthest. The devil says he can throw a rock so far that it won't come down for 3 days. If you can throw a rock further than that, says the devil, I'll give you your freedom. The devil chucks a rock and it goes up for 3 days. When it comes down, Jack picks it up and he lows, 'Good Lord, move the stars and the moon, 'cause the rock's coming to heaven.' The devil says, 'If you can do that, then you can beat me, 'cause I can't throw a rock within a mile of heaven.'" This is a story shared by the slave that he heard when he was younger. And in my research, pretty basic research, I believe that this is a story about Stingy Jack, who is a character from European folklore who introduced jack-o'-lanterns to our country, and is actually that entire story. And this is a story that I have not been able to find anywhere but from these slave narratives. It fits in directly with the story of Jack, the Irish myth about a man who played tricks with the devil during challenges. But this is a part of the story that we simply have not heard. I think this is a very basic showcase of how even things that we think we know the history of are incomplete without the stories of Americans born into slavery. Even stories we think we have heard a million times, they were also in these communities. They were also shared, and they also have versions and context to share. Back to the emancipated slave. I have lived with a good many masters, but never found any who cared to let their slaves go to a meeting or who talked with us about religion. Until I came to the Free States a few months ago, I did not know anything about God or the Bible. The planters used to curse God when it rained in harvest, or when the hail cut off their crops, or anything that did not please them. That was all I heard of him. I never knew anybody to preach to the slaves but once. Sometimes a white preacher, when he meets a slave on the road alone, stops and talks with him if nobody is in sight. He takes a book out of his back pocket and reads, and he tells him about a wicked place he will go when he dies, and be burnt up if he does not mind his master and mistress. If anybody is ever looking at them, they don't dare say a word. I have never heard them speak once about heaven. The power of stories can also be shown through the stories about our country. We often think of Americans born into slavery as people who were there while the creation of America happened, but not only not part of it, but not witnesses to it, not people who had feelings and thoughts about it. And to show that, I would like to share two stories from American slaves about the meetings between Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis. This is from Phil Towns of Georgia, on a meeting between Lincoln and Davis. Lincoln had sent several messages to Georgia requesting that he free the slaves. No favorable response was received. Lincoln had a conference with Mr. Davis, and to this meeting he carried a Bible and a gun. He tried with vain to convince Davis that he was wrong according to the Bible. So he finally threw the two upon the table and asked Davis to take his choice. He chose the gun. Lincoln grasped the Bible and rushed home. Thus Davis began the war, but Lincoln had God on his side, and so he ended it. These were short stories that were shared with him as a child about what was happening around them, about what was happening in America, the country that they were helping create. Back to the emancipated slave. They do not like to have any kind of serious in the slaves. They do not want them to think. If they see one of them looking sober, they tell him to be merry. They say he is hatching up some kind of deviltry. They used to say so to me, for I could never laugh and joke as the rest did. I never saw a slave who could read. They would not let us touch a book, but whipped us for that as much as anything. If we hated master ever so much, we did not dare to show it, but we must always look pleased when he saw us, and we were afraid to speak what we thought, because some would tell master. I know that I was wronged, and I have laid many time and thought about how to get revenge, but something always said, don't do it. We had heard little about a free country. I want to take one more break from the emancipated slave to talk about directly how Americans born into slavery built our country, physically and through the experiences that make us Americans and make this America. Starting with Frank Freeman, an American who was born into slavery, of course. They never taught us books of any kind. I was about 8 years old when I began to study books. When I was 21, Christmas Eve, 1880, my father told me I was my own man, and that was all he had to give me. I had decided many years before to save all my nickels. I kept them in a bag. I did not drink, chew, smoke, or use tobacco in any way during this time. When he told me I was free, I counted up my money, and I found I had $47.75. I had never up to this point tasted liquor or tobacco. I don't know anything about it yet. I have never used it. With that money, I entered Shaw University. I worked 8 hours a week in order to help pay my way. Later, I went into public service, teaching 4 months a year in a public schools. My salary was $25 a month. I kept going to school at Shaw until I could get a first grade teacher certificate. I never graduated. I taught in the public schools for 43 years. I would be teaching now, but my blood pressure is too high. And I would like to share the words of Sarah Gudger. This text is going to be, as I've said before, I changed the text slightly to make sure it is something that is understandable and something that is appropriate for me to say. This has a much more of a stronger dialect to it, and you will notice that as I am reading. I remembers a time when my mommy wasn't alive. I was a small child, and we went down to Rims Creek. All of us childrens was playing to one night, just running around and a-playing like children will. All of a sudden, my mommy come to and sitted. "Come here this minute," she said. "Just look up at what is happening." And bless your life, honey, the stars was falling just like rain. Mammy was terribly scared, but we children weren't afraid. No, we weren't afraid. But Mama, she said every time the star falls, somebody gonna die. It looked like a lot of folks are gonna die from how many stars were falling. Everything was just bright as day. You could pick up a pin. You could pick a pin up. You know the stars don't shine as bright as they did back then. I wonder why they don't. They just don't shine as bright. Wasn't long after that they took Mama away, and I was left alone. Now, this story is particularly interesting because when they were interviewing her, they of course asked her about herself. And this American who was born into slavery told them she was born in 1816. It was currently 1937. If you are following this, this means at the time of this interview, she was 121 years old, which the researchers were understandably skeptical of. So they did some further research. One of the most in an updated version of that, they share some statements that they say, some factual information corroborating her statements. The most interesting of which is this. One of the most spectacular meteoric shows on record, visible all over North America, occurred in 1833. Right about when she said it did. These are not just people who built our country literally. They have the experiences that made our country. They lived through the creation. They are part of it, down to its core. I would like to return one final time to the emancipated slave. Nobody can tell you how bad the slaves were punished. They treated us worse than dumb beasts. Many a time I have gone into the swamp and laid down and wished I was a dog or dead. The house servants are not treated any better than the rest. Some mistresses will, when they give them cloth, will not let them make gowns or frocks to cover their arms and shoulders, but make them just tie it on with strings so that they may be fair for whipping. I have seen pretty tight times, but it's all over now that I am free. I am mighty happy now. I am so glad. I can't sleep at night for thinking of it. The people here are different from what they were in Carolina. I like them a heap better. They look different and act different and talk different. There they all look all pale and sickly. They don't work and have everything done by slaves. All the women do is read or play with children or sing and make music and goes to balls and parties. All the men do is hunt and race horses. Some of them have never felt the sun on their skin. The Emancipated Slave ends with this author's note from the person who transcribed it way back then for an anti-slavery paper during the push for abolition. We wish our friends could have had the opportunity we enjoyed of hearing the story of this fugitive from his own lips. It would not be necessary again for 1 year at least to extort them to active, self-denying effort for the slave, the scarred back of the victim attesting the truthfulness of his story, his privations and sufferings in the house of bondage, the perilous escape, and as he would tell of them, the joyful exclamation of "I am free," would now send a thrill through their hearts, that they would not forget to their dying hour, and lead them, as it led us, to repeat before high heaven the vow never to relax their efforts, until the whole system of vile oppression and wrong by which millions of such are crushed into our land is uprooted and destroyed. We wish that the doubters in immediate emancipation might have the same opportunity. A mere thing, a mere cattle personal, so suddenly changed into a man, thinking, reasoning, working, just like other men. It is indeed wonderful. If any resilience can be placed on a single instance, this would seem to prove pretty conclusively that if all the rest of the goods and cattle in the South were at once in the twinkling of an eye to undergo the same transmutation, it would be to the benefit of all parties concerned. The quiet deportment, the cheerful performance of labor under the stimulus of wages, the joyful use of free limbs, the content that all day long rests upon the brow of the fugitive, might lead them to at least examine with candor the mass of other evidence by which the great truth is now demonstrated, that the best preparation for freedom is to set the slave free immediately. We wish that such cases were more generally known. It would awaken thousands who are now folding their arms in sloth to the generous effort of the bleeding slave. And I think that really speaks for itself at how powerful and important these stories are. So I would like to end by quickly highlighting two quotes from the emancipated slave earlier on. They do not like us to have any kind of seriousness in the slaves. They do not want them to think. But it's all over now that I am free. I am mighty happy now. I am so glad I can't sleep at night for thinking of it. Thank you.